So welcome everyone to our salary negotiation workshop. I'm Lexi, the GSA Vice President, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Walters, who has helped a ton with this Graduate Student Association Appreciation Week. This has just been awesome, so we really appreciate having her and all of her help. So with that, Dr. Walters, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Thank you so much, Lexi. I'm happy to. Again, my name is Megan Walters. I have the pleasure to serve UNCG as the Associate Director for Career Development. And that means a whole lot of things, but this week it means that I'm so excited to support Lexi and the Graduate Student Association in what an incredible week of programming. Major kudos to you, Lexi, and to your whole team for putting together a series of events that is practical, fun, and some hints of free stuff. So you've done checked all the important boxes for how to make a great week of events. So thanks for including career and professional development in a couple of these events. We're really stoked. You all are in for such a treat today. When Lexi and I started connecting about this opportunity, and we were exploring options for a salary negotiation workshop, I said, look no further. I said, I think I have a card I can pull with a very close friend of mine. Catherine is she's a rock star. She's a force. You're going to learn so much today, but Catherine Goetz serves as the Senior Manager for Diversity and Military Recruiting Programs at T-Mobile. So the work that she's going to talk with you about today is what she thinks about all day, every day. And before she joined the team at T-Mobile, she was a Spartan. Her day job was at UNCG, working also in my office. So I love and trust Catherine. She's so fantastic. And she is also a graduate student at UNC Greensboro in the ERM program focused on program evaluation. So she is a Spartan through and through, but she is coming to us this morning from the Seattle area. So thanks for the time zone math, Catherine. I invite everyone to take great notes, ask good questions today, and get the most you possibly can out of this session with Catherine. Catherine, I'm so stoked for you to spend time with us. Thank you for joining us. Oh, great, Lori, another ERMer in the crowd. Hi, Stacy. So Catherine, with that, I'll invite you to take the show.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Megan, for such a kind introduction. I'm really excited to be as back as we can be, right, in this kind of virtual time. And I echo Megan's sentiments, Lexi. The lineup has been amazing. I'm fortunate just because, right, I'm in the program that I get the notifications, and it looks like an incredible set of resources. So kudos to you and your team for sure. So let's get started. For a little bit of context, I'll tell you about my day job at T-Mobile. So to Megan's point, I lead basically all things inclusive recruiting strategy for the organization. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about what policies and practices, right, need to change, be better. Should we continue to create a more equitable experience for talent, right? And talent means each of you, right? The people who come to work in organizations. And so I share that to say that the conversation really is changing. The landscape is changing around transparency in pay with a real focus on equity, parity, and those kinds of things. So if there was the best time to advocate for yourself in your career, it's always the right time, but especially now. I hope that I gave you some confidence to know that this is a really important piece of your professional journey, and that it'll be embraced by so many employers, right, who are thinking about this on the internal side as well. So I know that this is also titled The Art of Salary Negotiations, and it's an art, and it's also a science, and there's no secret formula, right? So what you won't come away with is, if I do A plus B, I will always equal X, right? But what we can do is talk about how to get yourself to a place where you feel like you can make confidently an ask that's going to be in service to you as a professional, to your organization, and to your long-term goals. So we'll walk through kind of the three components that I think are going to be the most helpful for you. But along the way, I would love for this to be a discussion, right? This is definitely not a one-sided conversation. So Megan, I don't dare venture into finding the chat on the platform, but maybe you can help me along the way. So for each of these three kind of buckets, right? Shout out your questions in the chat or come off mute, whatever works best for you. And then we'll save a lot of time at the end for the discussion that you really want to have. Sound good? Okay. Let's dig in. So there are so many statistics out there about salary negotiation and pay disparity and tremendous research. And I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's worth the read for sure. But there's one thing that will be true no matter what industry you're going into or what your career path looks like. And that's that nearly 100% of the time, you will not get what you don't ask for. So if you don't take anything else away from this, that is a universal truth that we have to remember is ours to influence. And so what I'm thinking we can do is talk a little bit about the science, not exactly science, but I'll show you what this looks like. And really the purpose is really just to understand the impact of a starting salary. I think before you get into a role, it's difficult to understand what the compensation package is comprised of, right? Like, why does it matter where you start? And so once you understand why it matters, you can make a good decision about the art piece, right? It's a really emotional process. So understanding kind of what you can control and what you can't is really important. And hopefully those things will kind of set you up well for the most important part, which is the ask. And we'll literally walk through kind of play by play what that looks like, talk about what it feels like, because it's hard for pretty much everybody, right? And then we can talk about maybe some of the nuances. So the science. Okay, so it's not really science, it's really more math, right? But there are some things that are kind of quantitative and true. So before we dive in, I do want to kind of bust one myth. There's almost always, unless maybe you're in a family business or a startup, there's almost always a band, right? And when I say band, what I mean is that there are entire teams that predetermine what the salary ranges are for different roles. So even though it feels like we are kind of, fishing for whatever the right number is, especially if we're not familiar with the industry or it's the first opportunity or you're pivoting, from one sector to another, it can feel really daunting because it feels like we're just kind of grabbing for, hypothetical numbers, but there's always a band. And so what's important to understand is how compensation structures or what those packages are made of, right? So these are arbitrary numbers pulled out of wherever. So I'm not saying that everybody starts here, right? Some folks will start lower than this or higher than this, just depending on your industry. But most packages look pretty similar, right? So you'll have a base starting salary. And that's typically what we think about when we go into negotiations. We're like, okay, what's that base number going to be? But oftentimes there's some sort of multiplier on it as well. And so in many companies, much like T-Mobile, there will also be some sort of percentage that's a bonus every year. And so that means that you're eligible up to a certain dollar amount, right? So if we use this example of a starting base of 70 and a 15% bonus, that gives you a total compensation that's higher than 70. And so from an employer perspective, they're going to want you to consider the entire package that you're eligible for. And then usually beyond that, unless you get promoted, usually there's a standard increase around 3%. The point here is that every percentage is rooted in your base, right? So if you start here and you're excited to have the opportunity, and I think back to so many of, especially like the early part of my journey, you're just so excited to have the opportunity. It's your dream job. You've done, all of the work to interview well and kind of gotten yourself emotionally invested, right? In this new role that's going to set your career off on the right track. And so it's really easy to feel thankful and grateful and excited because you were selected, and forget that starting base will dictate the trajectory for the rest of your earnings within that organization, right? So really important just to understand the role that the base plays in, in compensation. So the other thing to remember is that everybody else is getting that same percentage based on their base. So if you don't ask for what you want, if you don't ask for what you think is reasonable, it's really difficult to make up the difference. If you're only earning a 3% increase unless you get promoted, year over year, that gap gets bigger and bigger. And so I'll let you do the math on your own about what those differences are. But it's really just important to understand, again, that all of those extras are a percentage of where you start. So,
Catherine, there's an idea floating in the chat about a bonus. What's a bonus depending on industry, right? So I'm wondering if you can speak to like what else might be in that box, like that is bonus. What are other things that that are in the package that we could be thinking about? Because I too feel that what is a bonus kind of question about the work I do.
And so bonuses are really common in a corporate structure, less so in government or in higher education. Sometimes you'll see it on the private side of education, but it really just depends. And so a bonus in this instance, and I'm not sure who asked that question, but I love it, is really comprised of a couple things. It's driven by individual performance. So how well did you kind of, rise to the occasion or meet the needs of your role and support the team? So individual contribution and company contribution. And so usually they make it a little bit more complicated, but usually if you're working for a public company and they perform well, the stock goes up, then you're going to get a piece of that, a percentage of that pie. And then there's also, again, like a component of it that is driven through individual contribution. So that's one way that you can be compensated in addition to your base. Now, these are not the only types of compensation, right? So this is just kind of a typical corporate package, but there's a lot of other things that go into this too. So maybe you're in an organization where, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the kind of the art section of this about what the differences or nuances are in different industries. But if there's little room for negotiation or they've been really transparent from the beginning and they said, this is the range, there are other things that make up your total compensation. So think about flexibility of work. Can you be remote? Is there a hybrid model? Think about things like time off. Some people call it paid time off, PTO, other people call it leave, but those are things that you can negotiate as well. I had someone on my team until recently who, and only recently because I lost her to Netflix. So if we have to lose her, I guess we can be proud. But she negotiated for Fridays off because she had a new baby. And so it was really important that she and her wife had the flexibility, right, to make sure that work fit around their new family schedule. So there are things that you can do to create the work experience that you want, even if the base isn't as flexible depending on the industry. But for this purpose, I think, I just want you to understand that where you start will dictate and is very much tied to other incentive compensation. And if you get a 3% increase, it's always going to be tied year over year to where you start. Any other questions about this piece?
We've got some questions coming in, but I think you're going to hit on some of this, so I'll save them.
Okay. Let me see. So this is another view, but think about it this way. So you have gotten your opportunity. You said yes to 70K. You're feeling great because you negotiated, right? This is the view of what happens if you didn't. So maybe the range is 50 to 70, right? And it feels like, oh, I could be really excited about either of these numbers, right? There's always going to be someone in your organization who negotiated, and there's going to be folks who didn't. This is the difference, the stark difference, right? 80 to 57.5 for the same role, potentially, right? That is a massive difference to make up. So the point here really isn't to compare apples to apples and say, oh, if you ask for 70, you get X. If you ask for 50, you get Y, right? But instead to understand that that gap from wherever you started only grows over time unless you get promoted, move industries, move roles, that kind of thing, which is a little bit more complicated than it should have to be. So all to say, nearly 100% of the time, you'll not get what you don't ask for. So make sure that you understand how your compensation is structured, what's tied to that base salary, and use that to drive your decision-making to the extent that compensation is a really critical part of you taking the opportunity. Okay, so that is the science piece. I think what may be even more helpful than that is really the art side of this, right? And so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about just the emotional investment that the job search process in general is, right? You've gone from this exploratory place where you just want to learn more to really going all in through the interview process and talking about why you are the right fit for the organization, right? I know for me, especially coming into UNCG, I was falling in love with the team and the people and the culture, right? And the campus. And so you go through all of those emotional steps, and then you hope that you get that offer. And so by this point, oftentimes you're invested, and likewise, the team is invested in you as well. And so when you think about now asking for something in addition to, what may feel like a wonderful gift and opportunity to work in an organization, it can be hard. It can be hard to ask for more. And so what's really most important is that you define your span of control. What are the things that you can control or influence or make good decisions about? And then what are the things that you can't, right? What are the things that are out of your control that you can learn as much as possible about, but that maybe you'll never have the finest tip on? And so that's okay too. And understanding what those pieces are will hopefully help to make that process a little bit less of an emotional lift. So let's take a look at what some of those things are. And then my hope is that we can spend some good time answering questions in some of these boxes as well. So this is all about doing your homework, and we're grad students, so we're no strangers to research, right? And so this is all about the learning journey. And so you'll see there's a lot of categories here, and I'm sure that they're not completely exhaustive. But I tried to just kind of do a broad sweep, right, of some of the things that you'll want to focus on. So if we look at the far left, probably the most important are your personal needs, right? Just like an organization, 99.9% of the time has an established band. This is where people for this role with this type of experience, right, will fall in the organization. We also know we're going to need to, to lead the quality of life that we want and need to, right? So do the math for yourself, understand what it will take, right? What are your thresholds or your non-negotiables? The other thing to consider are your long-term goals, right? Are you taking the opportunity because this is a once in a lifetime experience that you cannot get somewhere else? Is there something so nuanced about this that's going to set you up to meet your long-term aspirations that it's worth being flexible? Or is this something that really is just going to help you get 2 feet into an industry that you're excited about? Or is this going to be the role that just gets you professional experience, right? Like those are very different things, and I think can set you up to shape different expectations. So it's really important, especially as we get farther down the road and you are ready to make the ask, or you've made it and you're waiting, understanding what your non-negotiables are going to be really, really critical. And it helps you to make that ask with some authenticity behind it, right? Because you're confident that at a minimum, this is what you need, believe, and expect to be paid for an opportunity. Some of the other, so the middle and right-hand side are really more about fact-finding, right? And getting into the weeds of what's available in terms of data. And so depending on your industry, the compensation structures and the pay bands change pretty dramatically. And so it's really important that you know that if you're working in a small nonprofit, that their ability to compensate their employees may look really different than if you're working at a Fortune 40, right? But the work is also different. The teams are different. Hopefully the expectations, right? The tempo of the organization, some of those things are different too. So make sure that you have a really realistic picture of just like what those differences are. And then there's some great tools out there. If you're in government or in public higher ed, it's a public view, and oftentimes it's included on the job description. And then if you're looking in the private sector, the tools out there are getting much, much better, right? As companies start to understand that this is a really critical part of equity. LinkedIn Salary, Glassdoor, those pages are getting much more robust and can help to kind of guide your decision making. There are a couple of other things here, but let me stop for just a second. I think I see the chat light up. Anything to touch on here first, Megan?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions that are just all over this slide. And one speaks to what you were saying about emotions and how this is an emotional process. And there's a question about how to know the difference between what I'm worth and what is reasonable. And is there a connection there? Are they different? How does that work? And I think for me, I see this question show up when I feel less than confident about what I deserve. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that, my worth versus what's reasonable. And then I'll pose some more.
Yeah, what a great question. Are they connected? Certainly. But I think that, I mean, ultimately what each of us are intrinsically worth spans far beyond compensation, right? And so I think that to the extent that you can do the best homework that you can to understand what the band is, then you can think about how to map your skills and sell yourself into that place within the band that feels appropriate, right? And so I think that's one of the most important pieces about either doing your homework, but also having the conversations, right? To understand what that means. And so you'll see here, right? Like I've listed, obviously, career and professional development, incredible resource. They work with employers. They can ask the questions on your behalf. They advocate to put compensation included in the jobs posted and handshakes. So there's a lot more visibility that you can get that way. And then you can also lean into your network. I know I've switched industries a couple of times. And so I found it really difficult to understand how to kind of pivot my university compensation package to corporate. I had no clue. And I was in employer relations, right? And I still wasn't really certain. And so it's very okay to say that, right? You are as invested as your recruiter and your hiring team are in you. They're offering you for a reason. You've done an exceptional job and they want you to be part of the team. So at this point, you're in it together and you can say, I'm not sure how to set my expectations, right? I know what experience I bring. I'm clear about how I'm going to contribute to the team. I know why that's valuable to this organization. Can you give me a better understanding of the range so that I can make a good decision for myself? I think that's probably the right way, as opposed to kind of trying to quantify your compensation based like worth, so to speak, without that information. I think it just becomes really difficult. And then it sows potentially the seed of, if the band isn't right what you need it to be, that somehow they don't value you or your contributions or your potential. And so to keep away from that, I think the more information you can get on the front end, the better. And then you can decide within that band, what do you think is reasonable and appropriate?
Thanks, Catherine. Connected to that, there's a question about whether or not it's appropriate to ask someone in the organization what their budget is. And I think there's some semantics there that we can work through, but it connects to what you were just saying. And I wonder if you can expand on, like, who is it appropriate to ask questions like this? And how do people know?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And we can talk about both who and when, right? And so one of the things that I think is a myth, right, is that compensation, right, budget, all of these things are like locked behind a vault, right? The reality is that by the time you get an offer, the recruiter and the team's biggest fear is not that you're going to ask for too much money. It's not. It's that you're going to turn them down. And then they have to go break the heart of a leader who has already signed off on you being part of the team, right? And socialize that with all of their team. So with that in mind, I do think it kind of changes the conversation. When you think about when, right, it's really important that you've already had a discussion so that you're not just asking about compensation for compensation's sake, right? So I think there's a sentiment in the recruiter community that if you're only interested in a role for the dollar amount, that perhaps it's not the fit. So you need to make sure that you've at least demonstrated why you're excited about the organization, what's important to you. Doesn't mean you have to be all the way through the recruiting process, right? Like this is not volunteer. It's not a volunteer exercise, and everybody should respect that. But you shouldn't lead with a compensation question. You should lead with an inquiry about the opportunity. And you can ask those questions about the role, the team, from a hiring manager, from somebody who works there. I get a lot of requests just to kind of, hey, could you tell me a little bit more about T-Mobile in general, right? Like, what do you work on? What does the team structure look like? That kind of thing. So that at least you go in and informed. The right place to probably ask about compensation is from the recruiter. They're the buffer, right, between you and the hiring manager, and their job is to advocate for you, right? Their job is to make sure that you have everything that you need to have an excellent conversation, and that the hiring manager has everything that they need to make a good decision. So they can also sneak peek behind the curtain. They can go into the system and just look at the range, right? Because it's not like it's a secret to them either. So as long as you have demonstrated that you genuinely care about the opportunity, the team, you're interested, and you're asking the right folks. So a recruiter as compared to maybe somebody who would be your peer, or oftentimes a hiring manager can give you the same information, but the recruiter is probably the easiest or the path of least resistance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for my work environment, so anytime I've served as a hiring manager, I think it's helpful for you all to know that, the term recruiter is essentially a fill in the blank, right? The recruiter, that position might be someone who has a recruiter title. It might be someone like me who would have a hiring manager or direct supervisor title if I'm leading the search and I'm the one communicating with you. In academic, searches, that could be any number of people, but who is your contact going through the process? And so I think just understanding that language of recruiter really can be anything. And what you're looking for is who your person is, who your contact is, who the person is that's shepherding you through the process.
Absolutely.
There's a question about the connection between salary and importance of job, or perceived importance of job. Does the importance of a role increase as a salary increases? And I think here is, this is a question kind of about stratification, right? Like if you're in an industry, if you're in a company, if you're in an organization, does that mean that a company values one position more if the salary is higher, or a kind of work, they prioritize that if the salary is higher? Do you have any thoughts about that?
That's a good question. So a couple of things come to mind. So first, I mean, there is a hierarchy in terms of compensation that's supposed to be tied to accountability, right? And so a president, right, of an organization, or someone who's responsible for the success of the organization on the whole, they're going to have a higher compensation than maybe someone who's coming in to help execute that work or to get it done. So there is a hierarchy. But the other things that are really important are that are tied to compensation are things like your market. So it's corporate speak, but like your market index, right? Where you live matters and will change what you're paid as compared to maybe some of your counterparts. So like I live in Seattle, and it's outrageous. And so that plays a part in my compensation package as compared to my counterparts who maybe lived in Orlando, right? Or if I were to move back to Greensboro, there would be an adjustment for that. So there's that component. And then the other thing is how expensive it is to get that talent. So if there's a niche specific type of role, right? If you're particularly, as a graduate student, if you're learning something that is not widely understood or couldn't be upskilled internally, there is usually a market premium for that. That really matters. So it doesn't mean that you or your role is necessarily more important than your counterparts, but it does mean that that skill set commands a higher dollar amount in the market because they're just not widely available. Which I think is one of the bigger benefits, right, of advanced education, is that you can get nitty gritty and you do have a niche expertise often that other people won't bring to the table, which is really, it's leverage in a conversation about salary.
Yeah, a follow-up comment that I've got about that is, some people might choose to take a position that is perceived as lower, maybe a different level of importance for their own personal growth, right? They want to learn a certain skill set so that they can advance later, or they're connecting value to the experience they're going to have rather than connecting value to the salary that they're going to pull in. And so there certainly are differences there.
100%. Well, and I think, Megan, you're exactly right. Like that speaks to your personal needs and your long-term goals, right? Mm-hmm. And so work is so much more than compensation, right? And compensation can change depending on where you go. So I definitely think that should be one of the primary drivers for how you evaluate an opportunity to begin with.
There are a couple of other specific questions. I'll pitch them to you now, and if you want to put them off until if it fits better in another part of the conversation, that's great. But one is about negotiating things that aren't salary, specifically paid time off. How will a candidate know if those things are actually negotiable, and how to talk your way through that? So for example, you shared about the person on your team who negotiated for a day of the week off. That probably isn't a widely known thing, or it's not something that everyone that joins the community negotiates for. But how does a recruiter decide, like, yes, that's something we can do, or no, that's something we can't do?
It's a great question, and we'll spend more time on it in the ask. But from a job seeker perspective, everything's negotiable.
Oh. Sorry, Catherine.
You're pressing buttons over there.
I said, don't say what you're going to say. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry about it.
I don't know what you heard, but I said from a job seeker perspective, everything's negotiable. Don't sell yourself short by imagining that, what you're looking for or something that would help you contribute better to the organization is not like a thing. Ask for everything. So there's the component that a recruiter, like a standard, like I showed you the package, right? There's a standard example that the recruiter uses for everyone in terms of how to set expectations. But ultimately, it's up to the hiring manager how and in what ways their teams do their work. And so it may be superseded by an organizational policy, right? If nobody's remote and you ask to be remote, there may be like additional conversation that has to happen, or they may just say, hey, our policy is that we can't do it. But when you're in the negotiation stage, everything's on the table. Any other questions about like how to do your homework? I know that there's no one site because so much of this is self-reported that's perfect, right? But I will say again that companies are having a bit of a paradigm shift around around how acceptable it is to talk with candidates about information. And then also some states are requiring pay transparency on their job descriptions, which is really starting to trickle into, because usually you don't just hire in one state if you're a larger company, or if the big companies in your state are doing that, then it's going to force other entities to become more transparent as well. So all to say, right, like if you can't find a range, or if that range is so big that it's unhelpful, which is sometimes the case, it is perfectly acceptable and expected that you're able to find a way to ask those questions.
One question that I'll ask about seeking information like this, I will hear a lot of students talking about sites like Glassdoor or other places that you can go to look up salary information. Do you have suggestions for just a general site people might go to, or context that people should keep in mind when they're looking at a site like Glassdoor?
Yeah, I think Glassdoor has gotten much better. PayScale is another one that typically has good information. And then also, know what information is public. So again, if you're in government, if you're in a public university setting, that information is public. So you don't necessarily need to go to a self-reported site. And shout out to Career and Professional Development. They can help you to navigate that too. I think the caveat is it's self-reported information, right? So just like when you're doing research, like what people put into the machine is what you get out. And so sometimes what you find is that those ranges are so different, even if the title is the same. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I've done my homework. It looks like X may be the range, but I'm having some trouble understanding where this role would be placed in the band. And we'll talk a whole lot more about what that sounds like. But I think, definitely do the research. Again, the sites are getting much, much better than they, I think, historically have been, because there's less stigma, right, around employees going and putting their information in, just because we're moving to this place of more transparency on the whole. But again, self-reported data is as high quality as the people who are inputting it.
Right. Okay, so Glassdoor, we said, what was the second one you said?
PayScale.
PayScale. Okay, fantastic. And then for Ashley, I can see your question. Some other places that can be helpful are like government information. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, you can find some PayScale info. If you are joining an academic community, you can search for salary information for public institutions like the state of North Carolina, for example. So there are lots of reputable places where you can find this information. And Ashley, if you have a specific industry ask, we can talk through that too.
Okay, so maybe we jump then to the ask piece of this, right? Hopefully I've built you up. This is the most important piece. So you've got the offer, now make the ask. And again, I will remind you, nearly 100% of the time, you will not get what you don't ask for, right? So this is your opportunity to really start to understand what reasonable is, and then to advocate for yourself. So I think that there are a few key steps, right, that you can take to kind of get yourself to a place where the delivery of your ask is well received. And so prior to being in higher ed, I worked in like boutique executive recruiting, right? So like as a headhunter. And this was the coaching process that we used to help people that we knew wanted to make an ask and to negotiate their salary, right? Because again, the recruiter's role or the hiring manager role, whoever it is that you're working with and that is your point of contact, is your advocate. And so the first thing that you want to do is just make sure that when you get your offer, you express your excitement. Let them know, remind them that you are not only just thrilled to be extended the offer, you're so happy that you were selected, but also be specific about the opportunity, right? This is signaling not only that you're excited to have the opportunity, but that you can envision yourself there and you understand how you'll contribute, right? The more specific you can be, you're laying the groundwork for the recruiter to be able, and you're basically giving that person the language to be able to advocate on your behalf, right? I'm so excited about this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to contributing in X, Y, and Z way. My skill set in Z is, I think, really going to allow me to make a difference. That language matters, especially if there's someone that you're working with in between, between you and the hiring manager. So if you're working with a recruiter or someone in HR, this again gives them the same language to advocate on your behalf. What may be surprising is your ask is really kind of stage 2, right? So it feels like it should be at the very end, but this is the beginning of the conversation, the very beginning. And so be clear about what you're looking for. And again, reiterate why you're the right person for the role, right? So you can say, I'm so excited about this opportunity. I see that the compensation is listed at $50,000. I'd really like to be closer to 70 or 75. Is that something that we can work on together? So it's the beginning of the process. And if you prepare yourself for that, I think it helps manage and kind of regulate the emotional piece of it for longer. And so kind of stage 3, right, is get comfortable with the pause. Silence is uncomfortable. You're going to ask, and then there's going to be a wait. Unless they've already been approved to go up to X, which as soon as that happens, you're like, oh, shucks, I should ask for more. It's usually the way it feels, right? But more likely than not, right, you're going to get silence and they're going to say, okay, let me either see what I can do, or, if they don't have the flexibility, they'll just tell you right then. But the most important piece here is silence does not mean no. So expect it, get ready for it, get as comfortable as you can, and try not to talk yourself out of it, right? It's really easy to say, I'd really like to be closer to this for these reasons and these, well, and maybe not that, right? And then you talk yourself out of what you've asked for. So be thoughtful about kind of getting yourself in a space of being clear about what you need. You've already told them why you're excited. They have the language to advocate for you, and then you wait. Ultimately, if you look at kind of the end of the conversation, the resolution piece, one of 3 things is going to happen. They're going to say no, right? And if you've done your kind of personal intuitive homework and you understand what your deal breakers are, that becomes a really easy conversation, because you will know whether or not, based on what they're able to provide, whether or not this is the right opportunity. And so that may sound like, I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for considering me. Unfortunately, I really need to be in X range, but I would love to stay in touch, right? You keep the relationship good, but you give yourself the opportunity to move on. They will say maybe, option 2, and then they go back and they kind of work through what is possible. So maybe we can't get you to 75, but we can get you to 70, and we can talk about other things that could be important, right? And so that's your opportunity. Again, if you've done that homework about what you need, that's a really good space to have that conversation, because they're trying to make it work for you. And so don't miss the opportunity to kind of make sure that if there are other things that are important to you, that you put those on the table. And then, the third option is to say yes. And then congratulations, now you're starting at a compensation package or with the kinds of benefits that are going to be, most valuable to you. So, the hope here is really that we kind of just diffuse some of the fear around asking. And Megan and I were actually talking about this not long ago. And one thing that I think we all in this space, because we're vulnerable, right, when we're asking for anything, but especially for compensation when you start a new role, is like, what if they take my offer back? Great companies will not rescind an offer because you negotiate. They will either say no, maybe, or yes. That's it. If you ever were to find yourself in a situation where it felt like, you could lose your offer, you really want to evaluate whether or not that's the right place for you, right? Because this is, again, a signal of equity in the organization. And if you come in and it feels, and that piece doesn't go well, or it feels like they're willing to take the opportunity off the table, you have to question, what longevity or growth could look like. But by and large, industry standards, and I had some behind the scenes conversations with my colleagues too. It doesn't happen, right? Again, so they're either going to say no if they can't make that work, they're going to say maybe and try to find a solution, common ground, or they're going to say yes.
Catherine, I wanted to add a little note about that, specifically about your comment that, great companies are not going to rescind an offer because you've negotiated. And I remember us having conversations when you and I worked on the same team about what if students experience a really difficult conversation around this? What can they do? What should they do? And I want to just take a moment to remind all of you who are on the call that if you are going through the hiring process, you're trying to negotiate your salary, you're talking with someone and something doesn't feel quite right, and you want to take the temperature there, contact our team. We have folks who are working directly with folks in industry. And if something isn't right, we want to know that. We want to help you not get in a trap. And we want to help all of our students and everyone in the UNCG community to connect with those employers who are not going to muck up this process. So I appreciate you offering that context, and that, there are lots of different opportunities out there that you're going to go for. But you should not expect that someone is going to rescind an offer because you are advocating for yourself.
Absolutely. Well, and employers expect you to negotiate, right? I think what's hard is we can't see what other people are asking for. And so we feel like we're the only ones, right? This is the only time that anybody's asked for more money, which is just, couldn't be farther from the truth. So I think just knowing that going in is really important. And then there was a really good question, Megan, a little bit ago about how to ask for things that aren't base salary, right? And so I think in that make your ask, under kind of be clear about what you're looking for, it doesn't have to be dollars. It can be PTO, it can be a flexible schedule. It can be, for some folks, they'll say, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I would love to understand what upward mobility looks like. Can we have a career conversation after 6 months or after a year? And often, those things are a bit baked into the process, but especially if you're working in a smaller organization, that could make a difference, right? Because then you won't be waiting at whatever salary you start at until an opportunity presents itself, but you've already kind of seeded that I want to have a conversation about role, compensation, the rest at a specified point in time. What questions can I answer?
Catherine, we're getting a couple of questions about negotiation for raises or within company or organization promotions. So one question specifically was about, I finished a new degree program. How do I use that to my advantage to negotiate a salary, a doctoral program specifically? And then just in general, guidance on asking for a raise in a current position.
Yes, great question. So especially, right, if you've met a meaningful milestone, so whether you've recently completed your degree, or maybe a certification, or added a skill to your toolkit, those are absolutely the right times to have a conversation about comp, right? So if we go kind of back to that make your ask point, be really clear. So kind of do that personal inventory. What has this degree done for you professionally, right? How has it helped you to contribute or to drive success in your current role? And talk about, the contributions that you've made. Don't sell yourself short. And I think sometimes when we're in a current role, it's easy to just assume that everybody sees what you've been contributing, right? But make sure that this is your moment to really make that known. And it could be, especially if you've worked with the same person for a while or the same team, that they're just so used to you being great that they haven't really stopped to pause and think about, oh, wow, this person really is delivering. And I want to make sure that we recognize that. So it's absolutely the right time to have a conversation. And if you have strong rapport and you're close to graduation, you can have the conversation beforehand too. Just make sure that when you do, you're not talking about what you will contribute, but what you have as part of that journey. The other thing that you can ask for that sometimes may get overlooked is, are there other opportunities to create either visibility or to lead something or to develop something that's going to help you just build your portfolio, right? Especially on the research side, if maybe you want space to write or to publish or, elbow room to go and to take on a new research project or something like that. So there are other things that you can ask for in addition to compensation. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and similarly, Catherine, I'm wondering about what about for folks who are nearing graduation? So they haven't yet completed, they're seeking new opportunities. During that initial negotiation period, is it appropriate to talk about, I will soon also meet this milestone. Can we renegotiate at that time? How does projected milestone work into the first round of negotiation conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that your best opportunity is to try to bundle it into the beginning, right? So I would say use that to your advantage and say, in 6 months' time and 2 weeks' time, whatever that is, I, will have accomplished X, because it's not like all that learning happens when you graduate, right? All that learning has already happened. You've done the work. So I would try to bake it into the front end. And then, if there's a threshold, so sometimes, especially like in government, right, there are specific kind of bands that say like, you must have X. If that's the case, then do call it out and say, hey, I'm starting, technically I'd start here, but I'm eligible at X point. And they may be able to honor that in advance, or they may say, as soon as this happens, we'll be able to kind of to flex. But I think if it's not that clear cut, I would ask for it in the beginning. These are good questions.
I encourage everyone to keep those questions coming and I'll moderate them. Let's see. Oh, this is Jared. This is a good question again about Glassdoor. So Jared sharing that, they're receiving daily emails from Glassdoor, probably because they've had some sort of interaction searching for opportunities. They're getting information about attractive salary ranges. How accurate are those numbers? Where exactly do they come from? And so you talked about this being a self-report site, Glassdoor in particular. Are there organizations that are also getting involved with reporting salary ranges on Glassdoor?
That's a good question. I know that pieces of it are self-reported, but there's also likely some sort of aggregate to scrape information, right? So if you post your compensation ranges, which are salary ranges, sorry. But if you post those ranges, and there's probably some sort of aggregator that will share that. I don't know exactly how Glassdoor specifically works as compared to others, but I think LinkedIn is a really good example of that, right? Where the company can put in information, and then you can also, like, they have LinkedIn salary, which I don't know if it's still in beta or not, but it will basically tell you what the estimated range is based on kind of market midpoints, right? So for every company who's included that information, they can kind of generalize out for you what the range may be. I also think that you have to do a little bit of an intuition check, right? So if you're thinking about an opportunity that has a really common title, but in a small organization or a nonprofit or something like that, and you see ranges that are just all over the place, your gut's probably going to say, hey, this probably isn't, these aren't probably the right benchmarks, right? Or goalposts, but if you're seeing some consistency, if it feels relatively accurate as compared to what you've seen in the past, or, if you've talked with your network, I think that that may give you more confidence. And again, you can always have that conversation about, I've done the best homework that I can. This is what I'm seeing, but there is no shame in just asking for transparency. And I think if we do anything as part of the kind of process to advocate for yourself, it's really that. Be honest, right? As an employee, they're going to expect you to be honest and transparent. And it's a really celebrated skill set, right? We kind of bucket that in the EQ side of performance. So being really transparent and saying, I want to make a great decision for myself, and I'm excited about this opportunity. Here's what I think I've seen. Help me understand what that looks like. These are good questions. And again, there's no A plus B equals X. I know I kind of wooed you with the science piece of this, and then it was really just math. So sorry about that. But I think if you have a framework, right, and you know that you've kind of done your own personal inventory, you've done the best homework that you can, you're leaning into your resources like Megan and her team, who can either help you do some of that homework, be that intuition, right? If you have questions or you're not sure if this sounds right, or call an employer. I can't tell you how many times in Megan's office, my team would go back to an employer and say, hey, we don't have any basis for this. Can you tell us what the range is? We just need to know, right? So that saves you the conversation. So let your teams be your advocates and let your resources be your advocates too.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the end of time, so I want to just encourage people, if you have any outstanding questions, drop those in the chat, or you can come off of mute and voice them. But there was a question before about, okay, Megan, how do I get in touch with your team? Or like, what do we do next? And what I want to offer you is the promise that information is coming. So Lexi has put this program together. You registered for the session. So I'll be able to email all of you with just a recap. Here's the science, the art, the ask, and some tips on notes that I've been taking, but I will also drop in some links for how to schedule appointments. Lori Special has done that because she's a fantastic librarian. You've got the link to schedule an appointment through Handshake, but we've got some really great resources too, where you can practice doing research. We have a new interview platform, and there is a learning module about negotiation there. You can practice voicing some of the things that you might say, think about phrasing and how you would ask for what you need. So please come and see us, but also know I'm going to send you an email with a lot of really great info. One email or question that has come in that I want to pose to you, Catherine, is about companies computing cost of living comparisons. They don't always add up, it seems. So you had mentioned, like, gosh, Seattle's really expensive, so the salary info out here might be different. How do companies come up with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a difference between your cost of living, and there are a lot of calculators out there, right? If I lived in X city, I would make Y dollars as compared to another. But it's not just based on like how expensive your community is. It's about how expensive it is to hire in that place, right? And those are two very different things. And so the good piece of that is that it's set, right? Whatever your market index is, that's like a known. So there's not a lot of fluctuation there. You're not going to get like more market or less market from negotiating. I think the harder part is that I don't know that there are many good calculators for that, right? Because every company is able to attract talent differently. So I think that's a good distinction to make, that it's likely that whatever your calculator isn't going to tell you what your offer should look like, but it can tell you in that personal inventory section, like, what do you need to meet your needs, right? Like, what does that lifestyle or the dollar amount need to command to have the lifestyle that you want? So I think it's a really good starting place to do your homework.
The state of North Carolina has a tool called Reality Check that will allow you to get to what Catherine's talking about. What kind of life am I going to live? What are my ranges of expenses? what am I thinking about a 2-salary household, and some of you have thought through that a lot because you are at a different place in your career. Some of you are just starting out. And so there's different levels of information that you have access to, and this reality check tool will help you just get a clear picture. There was another question about length of time that you all as students have access to the information and the resources that career development offers. The true answer is that there are a lot of resources that we offer that you will never lose access to. Handshake being one of those tools. So, it's a centralized hub for a lot of career activity. We want to support you until you find your opportunity. So the unwritten rule here is that for 12 months after graduation, we are still going to offer you 100% of what we offer. After that period of time, we'll do a case-by-case basis, but until your UNCG email expires, which happens about 6 or 7 months after graduation, you will have access to all of our technology platforms. And then beyond that, you'll get some alumni access to some of those things too. All right, Catherine, the questions have stopped rolling in. So I just want to take a moment to offer you sincere gratitude for spending time with us today. I know that for myself, the information you share is powerful when I think about any time I might be negotiating. So I can only imagine how helpful it is for the folks on the call in what is a scary and exciting time of nearing graduation. So Catherine, thank you so much for spending time with us and coming back to campus for us today.
It's such a treat. No, I really appreciate it. And if you have other questions, Megan, you know how to find me. So let me know how I can help.
I do.
It was good to see you again, Catherine.
Oh, good to see you, Lori. Hi there.
And Lexi, thank you. And to all of you graduate students, this is the week for us to celebrate you. Thank you for everything you do for our university. You bring us so much. We are so grateful that you're in our community. Lexi, congratulations on a great week. Can't wait to see you.
Thank you.
So
it started off very great. Thanks to both of you. So everybody, round of applause for Catherine. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Seattle. We appreciate that so much. This was, just a perfect piece of this week. So thank you very much for that information. Well, everybody, I'm off to get my professional headshots taken. I hope a couple other people on this call are too. So with that, we'll sign off. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.